Okay, excellent. You should all be able to see that fairly comfortably now. Okay, as I was saying, for the latecomers, this will be a little shorter session than last week. The reason being that we had a situation come up in the ICW very recently, just yesterday, in fact. And I spent most of the day dealing with some of my colleagues and trying to get it resolved, and I'll come into that in a second. Tonight's session is going to be discussing some anchorages, some useful apps. There we go. Okay, some useful apps, and oh my is basically. There we go. Okay, yeah. Before I get on to that, if you have any questions, use the app and raise your hand. I should be able to see that. We have a chat box, which I should have enabled, and for some reason it's not showing. Okay. Yeah, there's a chat box there. You can also text directly to me at the number 443-852-9649. And if you are a friend of mine on Facebook, you can also text me on Messenger. I'll try and get to all the questions during this session. If for any reason I can't, I'll answer them on Facebook. Okay. So the crisis situation we have. If you have not been down through the ICW before, just coming into Savannah, coming into Thunderbolt more accurately, after you cross the river and you're now in the state of Georgia, there's a bridge called Costin Bluffs Bridge. Over the last several years, they've been removing the drawbridge, the bascule bridge that they had there, and installing a highway bridge. They're now at the last stage of installing the highway bridge, and they're removing the old bascule bridge foundations and everything. As a result of that, they're going to put the bridge, and we only found out about this yesterday. They're going to put the bridge on restricted hours from September the 18th for an estimated 7 weeks. In total, there will be 12 daylight hours split between Tuesday and Thursday, in which you can actually pass through the bridge on daylight. Otherwise, you will have total closure, and that includes nothing on Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday. So in terms of, and fortunately, this is, of course, the very busiest time of the southbound season, the month of October and November. So as a result, this is going to cause a significant problem on the ICW. So we've been speaking to people from the Georgia Department of Transport, the Coast Guard, and a number of other people. I've spoken to some of the other ICW players, and we're going to be holding a meeting on Friday with the Department of Transport and with the Coast Guard about how to properly resolve this, so people aren't getting jammed up at Costin Bluffs Bridge. Now, the chart that you see on the right there, those yellow blocks, that's the total amount of time during the week that is available during daylight to pass through the bridge. The blue blocks are the times that are open during the night, and the red blocks, that's it. Everything else is closed. The problem is that there is very little transient dockage in this area, and anchorages are not convenient, especially for a multi-day stay at this time of year. If there's any storm, if there's any cold weather, it's going to be most unpleasant. It became apparent to me in my conversations today with the Georgia Department of Transport that the needs of cruising boaters were not addressed and were not considered, but only because the Department of Transport doesn't know anything about doesn't know anything about boats. So as I mentioned, a group of us are speaking to the Georgia Department of Transport about this, and I will be updating on Sailing and Cruising Facebook's page as we learn what's going on. It may be that we will be asking boaters to phone in to express your views on what's going on here and get a phone-in campaign going if we have to put any pressure on them. I'm hopeful that the meeting on Friday will resolve those issues. So with that underway, let's, whoops, there we go. Let's move on. Okay, I just want to address again before we get started, attitude is everything in cruising. It's absolutely everything. And what you have to remember is that when you're cruising, stuff is going to go wrong. For example, in my case, back at the beginning of June, I was coming up between Beaufort and Charleston, South Carolina. My engine quit. So I spent the month of June installing a new engine on my boat. So things are going to go wrong. Stuff's going to break. Your anchor's going to drag, unless, of course, you have a mantis. There's storms that are going to happen. There's schedules that won't work out. Your outboard will screw up. I just finished fixing mine today, in fact. Maintenance is mandatory, and there's always maintenance to do, especially because you're using your boat so much more now than you were prior to going cruising. And there's times that you're going to be really, really discouraged. You got to expect that. You got to learn to live with it. You almost have to embrace it. So what you also need to remember is, look, that didn't work out very well at all. You could be here. You could be shoveling snow. You could be stuck on an expressway in a traffic jam trying to get to work or trying to get home. You know, there's lots of things worse than having some awkward moments on the ICW. Okay, now useful apps. When we started, well, a lot of us when we started cruising, and in my case, we didn't have apps that were available to us. The internet really and Wi-Fi really weren't that convenient on the ICW. If you got a connection, it was usually a pretty weak one. These three apps, Aquamap, My Tide Times Pro Chart, and windy.com are the three most useful apps that I've found. This is going to be recorded and put online later. So if anybody doesn't get these things, don't panic about it, because I see one or two people taking notes. In any event, these are the three most useful apps and the ones that I use most frequently. And there's lots of other ones available, but these are three that if you had to pick and choose, you couldn't go wrong with them. Now, starting with Aquamaps, it's a navigation app. There's a free version, and the master version is very inexpensive. I forget now what it costs off the top of my head, but it's very inexpensive. It's very, very easy to use. As I mentioned, it's low cost. It's very accurate. There's a lot of supplementary information. They have water guides information on there. They have active captain information. You can get U.S. Army Corps of Engineers information. You can also get information from hydrographic information, I should say, so that you can check for shallow spots in your trip. So it's a really, really convenient app for information. You can see on this one, this is this chart shows a little bit of the Bahamas. That's Chub Key. You can see where you can go to the waterway guide information for Chub Key right there. And then as you look down, you can see the depths, all the charted depths. And there's just all kinds of information that's available on it. It's an excellent app. You can also have it on your computer. You can also have it on your laptop, or you could have it on your phone. And should your regular chart plotter break down, you've got something that's got charts on it, accurate charts, and will actually work as your chart plotter for you. There's excellent support from the Aquamaps people. And if you want some more information on it, I have done a tutorial on Aquamaps with the owner of the company. It's at Sailing and Cruising Webinars. The link is down there. If you need to know it, I can look it up and get it back to you a little bit later on. Okay. Whoops. Now, a tide chart or a tide app and a current app are extremely, extremely useful. I use My Tide Times Pro Tide Chart. Several reasons. One, it's free and I'm a cheap Canadian sailor. Two, it's got all the information you could possibly want. In fact, the only thing it doesn't have, and it frustrates me a little bit, it doesn't have sunrise information, because sunrise is often very handy. It has sunset information, though. Anyhow, the way this works, this is the Cape May Canal. You can see where it gives you your high tide and your low tide, so you can plan on tide depths for passage. But in addition to that, it also gives you currents, okay? So in other words, in the Cape May Canal, the day that this was taken, at 1:54 a.m., you had maximum ebb current. In other words, the water is heading back to the ocean at its maximum speed of a knot. And 6 hours later, roughly 7:51 a.m., it's now flowing in at 1.1 knots. And this information can be very helpful when you're coming down the ICW in order to see what kind of currents you're going to be facing. Okay. Now, the other way you can use this, and again, I go back to the current chart. This is the Cape May Canal near Cape May on the Delaware River. And this is Liston Point, which is a distance north of that. Now, if you notice, your slack water is 4:58 a.m. at Cape May, and it's 11:27 a.m. at Liston Point. Now, when you know the mileage between those, you know your speed, you can plan to run with the current or avoid getting a bad current against you in areas where that's an issue. And that's just a technique that it'll take a little time to figure out, but once you do it, you'll find it very, very handy to be able to use that. Okay, another app that I like and use, there's again a free version. Oh, going back to Aquamap, sorry. You're able to get charts, and you can get all of your Canadian and US and Bahamas charts for one single price on a lifetime purchase, and that includes regular updates. So it's a really inexpensive option. Just to keep that in mind, I didn't want to forget about adding in the updates. Okay, so moving back ahead. Windy is an excellent weather app. It's probably, in my opinion, the best one out there. The basic app is free, and there's also a paid version. Go to www.windy.com. But the nice thing about it is that it gives you all the information you could possibly want. You got wind, you've got wind gusts, you got rain, you got your temperature, you got cloud cover, you've got waves and everything else. So whatever you need to know in terms of making a plan for your passage, in terms of weather, Windy will give that information to you. So I highly recommend. Now, here's one way it also has several different weather models. Now, for those of you who aren't that familiar with weather, and it's not my best topic either, but there are different models, computerized models, where they input the data that they have, and then the computer does its magic with all its algorithm. It comes out and says, this is going to be tomorrow's weather, this is going to be Saturday's weather, whatever, okay? But different models have different algorithms, so they give you slightly different results. And the way we use this as boaters, is we take a look at the different models. Now, I'm going to skip ahead here and show you something. This was something I did last year. And what I did was I took a screenshot of the south of Florida with the different predictions from the weather app for certain time and day, okay? So you can see here in the upper left-hand corner, at the very top of it, you can see some higher winds coming into central Florida. You can see winds that are about 14, 15 knots just off of Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. Then you go down to the next one, to the lower left, and you'd see over on the Gulf side, there's some pretty heavy winds coming in, okay? So it's a completely different model than what you're looking at in the first one. Whereas on the Atlantic side, you can see where there's a trough. You can see where there's a trough of light wind. If my cursor is showing up, and it should, you see there's a trough of light wind coming through there that could have an effect on some of your passage plans. But if this purple and orange or purple and red stuff over here comes across and you're planning and heading to the Bahamas, then you're looking at a nasty ride. And then you look at the third one in the lower right-hand corner, that trough of quiet, calm weather is shown at the same time as much broader, much more, what's the word I'm looking for? Much more calm weather. But you've still got that high winds weather over on the Gulf Coast. Now, the question here is, which model do you follow? Now, my rule of thumb has always been this: if your different models don't agree, then that means there's a lot of disagreement amongst the models, a lot of disagreement amongst the weather forecasters, which means they are not sure of what's going to happen. What you want to see in any circumstance is all of the models looking almost the same, because what that means is that different computer models have looked at it, they've analyzed the data, and they're saying, yes, we're in agreement. That's usually a pretty safe way to go. So in this situation, what actually happened? Whoops. There we go. Okay. That didn't work out. I'm just gonna, okay. As you can see, here's the GFS forecast. And here's what actually happened. You got heavy winds in the in-between area between Miami and Bimini. So had you gone out into that kind of weather, you would have gotten crapped on fairly seriously. Now the NAM forecast, again, as you can see, lots of heavy weather there. So the point is, when you're using the weather models, make sure they are, what's the word I'm looking for? And by the way, that's what you should have done in that case. Stayed back in Florida and got some Mount Gay rum and enjoyed yourself. The point is, if the models don't agree on windy, then reconsider your passage plans. Okay. Now, getting into some of the cuts and some of the passages and shoaling areas. Since we were talking about Georgia earlier, we're going to stick with Georgia for the moment. Next week, we'll swing back north and we'll get up into Virginia and North Carolina. Fields cut has been a problem for a long time, especially at the north end of it. And you can see here when you look closer at the chart that there's quite a bit of shoaling there from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers hydrographic map. Okay. The good news is that Fields cut is actually being dredged as we speak. Once that dredging is finished, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will again survey the area, and they will post a new hydrographic chart of the area. Now, these hydrographic charts come with the AquaMaps program. So when you turn on your AquaMaps, you can click on the switch and get the hydrographic downloads, and that'll show you exactly what you're looking at in terms of depth. And it's quite accurate. It works out extremely, extremely well. Should you come into Fields Cut and it's getting late in the day, there's a lovely anchorage immediately to the north, right there. You could also anchor over on the south side over here as well. Okay, moving on next. Oh, I wanted to go back here. Again, here was the earlier today. Here was Fields Cut. Word I'm looking for. Tidal chart. It was low at 213 and at 223, and high tide was at 802 and 815. Now, something to remember is that when you see the high tide, for example, okay, the current will not change until anywhere from half an hour to an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours after that. So don't, and we'll get into more detail on that in another session, but don't assume that high tide means that the current changes at that point. It does not. That's why you go to the current link on here, click on current and see what the currents are doing. Okay, another place you've heard of is Hell Gate in Georgia. Now, the issue with Hell Gate, it's been dredged. It's not too bad, although it's starting to fill in a bit. You'll still get at least 6 feet at low tide there. The thing about Hell Gate is that when you go through it, unlike other shoaling passages, the current when you turn is now on the side of your boat. So in other words, as you're coming through that passage, you're going to be being pushed either to the left or the right. What you want to do is line yourself up as you come down with the buoys that are here and work your way through, and then make your turn and come back all the way through. It shallows out a little bit here, and you want to favor the, in this case, would be the south and east side a little bit, right over to here. But as I mentioned, one of the problems is that you can get pushed sideways by the current. What you do to avoid that is as you're going through, look behind yourself. Boaters tend not to look behind themselves often, but look behind yourself and make sure that you're staying in the channel, okay? Don't presume just because your chart plotter shows you are, because you may be crabbing and drifting sideways out of the channel. It's happened to me, so I tell you about it now. Okay, your chart, your tide chart for Hell Gate is Egg Island. And again, as you can see, there's 9 feet of tide there. Now, something to keep in mind is that if you're a deeper draft than normal boat, if you're a little bit nervous, just wait for a later time in the day and go through with a little bit more tide under your keel. Now, Little Mud River has always been a problem. It draws 4.5 feet at low tide. It's a significant issue. But at 1 hour before or after low tide, Little Mud River will carry 5 feet of draft. 1.5 to 2 hours, you'll get 6 to 7 feet. And at 3 hours, you might as well bring on the Queen Mary because there's lots of water there. Its tide prediction station is Wolf Island. And at the south end, the very south end here at the bottom center of the chart, you want to make sure that you give the R198 a wide berth on an incoming tide because that current will push you into the shoal that is there. Okay. Now, again, looking at Little Mud River, those are some good spots to anchor, okay? You can anchor up in Duplin Creek, which is at the very top. You can anchor at any one of these creeks coming off here, off of the river itself. Just pull off the ICW and grab an anchorage there. The holding is real good. It's mud with some sand in it and a bit of clay. There's an 8-foot tidal range there, so when you set your anchor, make sure that you know how much extra you need to put out for the rise in the tide. For anybody who's feeling adventurous, about 8 miles, there's a river that comes off here called Darien River. There's a little town called Darien at the end of that river, about 8 miles down. They've got a free dock there, and it's a nice little town. If you want to take a little visit and do a little exploring, that would be something for you to know about. Okay. Another couple of anchorages for Little Mud River. Instead of going all the way down to Little Mud River, as you come off of Creighton Narrows, which is this section right here, turn to your right and go up the river here and anchor anywhere along here. Okay. There's virtually no traffic except a few small tin boats that people are going out fishing on. Good holding. It's a nice area there. You could also anchor over here on the other side, but don't go too far in there because it does shallow out fairly quickly. This corner here, as you're coming around, be cautious and honor the markers there because there's a big shoal right in the middle, so you don't want to get caught in that, obviously. Okay, Jekyll Creek. Jekyll Creek's one of my favorite places. A beautiful island, a nice anchorage, lots of interesting stuff to do and explore. Now, the problem with Jekyll Creek is that it's shoaled out again. Okay, they dredged it. It was 12 feet for a while. It was really fun to go through it at shallow water and see 11, 12 feet under your keel. Currently now you'll see 5 feet, maybe a little bit less because it's shoaled in rather badly. This is where the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers hydrographic charts come in really, really big. Also, if you're not using Bob 423, and I'll get into Bob 423 next week because that's a service all on its own. It's not really an app. But if you're using Bob 423, he's actually got a path, a track overlaid onto this, and if you follow that, you should go through without any trouble. Now, Jekyll Creek is very sensitive to wind tides. So a strong east wind will increase the depths and a strong west wind will blow water out. These are the areas where you were getting extreme shoaling through here, okay? And the channel itself is actually very narrow. So you want to be, it's about, I think, 50 to 75 feet wide when the channels are usually dredged out to over 100 feet. So even going as little as a boat length, 30, 40 feet outside of the center of the channel could put you into trouble. So you want to be aware of that and watch your path through. Again, remember the 3 magic words when you're cruising on the ICW and in these areas. Half tide rising. There is no place on the ICW that you cannot get through when you're at half tide or better, okay? In Georgia, for example, where we have those difficult spots, we've got 8-foot tides. Well, half tide rising is 4 feet extra water on top of the 4 feet, 4.5, 5 feet that's there in some of these places minimum. That's going to give you 9 or 10 feet and you'll have no problem getting through. Same with Jekyll Creek. In fact, I make a point now when I'm coming into Jekyll Creek of making sure that I'm coming in with at least half tide just to make life easier. So repeat it to yourself, make it your mantra. Half tide rising. Anybody repeating after me? Half tide rising. Okay, questions? I see we've got one question on the chat line there. Or do we? Oh, no, wait a minute. There we go. Carl just let me know for Aquamaps, the price is $14.99 for the US Canada charts, and the master program itself is $9.99. So for $25, you've got yourself a fully functional chart plotter on your iPad or your tablet, and you can also use it on your phone. And it has some limited functionality, I believe, on your laptop. I do have it on my laptop, but I don't use that very often. Okay, so do we have any questions here, folks? As I said, today was going to be a show. Oh, how did we get the recording last week? Aurora, if you go to Sailing and Cruising and scroll through to the announcement for tonight, I believe I put the link there. And if not, just send me a message on Messenger and I'll send you last week's recording, okay? Okay. Do you have any other questions there? Yes, I see. Let me unmute you here. Whoops. Okay, you have to unmute yourself. Okay.
Mute. Okay, is that for me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Could you repeat that half mast rising thing? I'm kind of confused about that expression.
Half tide rising.
Half tide, sorry, half tide.
Half tide rising. Yeah. No, half mast is when you want to hang somebody for being.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a whole different situation. You want
okay.
half tide rising. Okay. Do we have any other questions, folks? As I said, today was going to be a short day because I had to spend most of the day dealing with the situation in Costons Bluff. Now, a couple of you people I know came in late, so I'm going to back up and I'm just going to repeat that for everybody here. What is happening is, oops, okay. Saw something there. Okay. We were advised yesterday, we didn't know about it beforehand, but Coston Bluffs near Savannah in Georgia is going to be restricting the hours at the bridge at Coston Bluff, which is just in the very, very northernmost part of Georgia. It's the first bridge you come to past the Savannah River, about 3-4 miles in, I guess. The bridge is going to be put in restricted hours from September the 18th for an estimated 7 weeks, which brings it right into the dead center of the busiest time of the year, with hundreds of boats going south. So it's going to create significant problems. There will be very hi, Jane. Just to answer your question. Yeah, we'll discuss AIS briefly, but it's on the ICW. That's one of those things that's not real life or death. Anyhow, there'll be a total of 12 daylight hours split between Tuesday and Thursday for those 7 weeks to get through. The rest of the time that there are any open hours, it's at night. And the ICW is not someplace that you travel on at night. The ICW will be totally closed down there on Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So it's going to create some significant issues. Excuse me. Now, that little chart there shows you the open hours. The yellow blocks are the open hours during daylight. The blue blocks are the open hours during nighttime, and the red blocks are when the ICW is closed. So you can see it's a significant problem. Obviously, the needs of cruising boaters were not considered. From what the DOT told me today, they had no idea the amount of traffic that goes through the ICW at that time of year. So I'm hopeful that we'll get this thing resolved, and I'll be reporting back on that on Sailing and Cruising. Robert on Bob 423 will be reporting on it, and we hope we'll have some other sources that will be. Yes, it is, Carl. It's the Sam Varnado Bridge. Most of us just call it the Coston Bluffs Bridge. So anyway, we'll be reporting back in the situation. It's still a good month or more before any of us get down that far. So hopefully we'll have things sorted out so that it's not a complete and total mess down there. Do we have any other questions, folks? Going once, going twice. So thank you for dropping by this evening. We'll be getting into more anchorages and more shoaling areas. But this time next week, we'll go back up to North Carolina and Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, so that you have an idea of what the northern part of the trip is like. And then the week after that, we will discuss Florida, and at some point, we'll actually get into discussing crossing over to the Bahamas, so that you're not too lost about that. Okay, one last chance. Questions, folks? Okay, thank you. The video will be online later on tonight, and I'll set the link up on Facebook, Sailing and Cruising, so you can check it there. Thank you again, everybody. Enjoy your evening.